Hi, Ari here, and in this video, we're going to talk about Chapter 2 and 3, Unlearning, Changing Your Beliefs and Your Classroom with UDL. This is an overview of each of the sections in these chapters. Um, Really quick cliff notes or the down and dirty that for this part is Chapter 2 really goes over the idea of the importance of knowing your goal, why that goal is important, and how to do that. And then specifically thinking about how to clarify that goal. Once you know what your goal is it clear to your students and yourself what it is and the different ways you share that? In Chapter 3, once you've kind of got that down, we move into identifying potential barriers. Now, those barriers that students might encounter, let's make sure we understand that those are barriers that occur in a learning environment that we're going to help remove. And the last part about that is designing or redesigning, in many cases, lessons that align with our teaching techniques and our beliefs. So, are those two things really lining up what we believe and then the type of tools and techniques we're using in our teaching? All right, well, let's get started. Start with Chapter 2, Knowing Your Goal. So, the author started with thinking about the amazingness of each child. So, on page 15 and 18, she goes through different students that really surprise us, that change our thinking, that we go, wow, these kids come to our class and we expect them to be successful. Not only do we expect them, we know that they can be, and we support them in that, or we're not supporting them in ways that they need. So the author asks you to take a moment to think about a student that's transformed your thinking so we can really ground our learning and our unlearning in a student. Then think about what was amazing about that student and how he, she, they changed the way you taught. They changed your beliefs. They challenged what we know or thought we knew about schooling. And then when you have them in your mind and you know why they're amazing, you think about how does that link or fit with our understanding of variability of learners so that we can start thinking about what we're teaching. Have that student in your mind. Push pause if you need to think for a moment about it. So then we move to page 18. This part is where we really talk about your practice. This idea that no matter how well intended they are, that we have routines that become automatic. Some of those routines are awesome and they continue to serve us. Some of them are awesome. But the question is, why do we do them? Why do we think they're awesome? And who are they awesome for? Who are those routines working for? And if they're still on target. So those things that we did because they worked, that practice, that tool, that entry task, the way we shared something on the document camera, those routines that we do automatically every day that we expect our students to be able to do, are they still fitting the target of what we want students to do each of our days? The authors really get into this on page 18 with this paragraph. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment to look at this quote and maybe push pause and really think about it. Dig into this is a big one to think about. So, UDL offers frameworks to reach and engage all students. In your classroom, it might feel satisfying to have every student working on the same math problem at the same time. It can feel empowering to deliver and engage in a lecture to a group of students. But if these practices do not align with what we currently know about variability and learning, if they are not meeting the needs of all of our students, are they the best design? What would it mean to trade them in for new ways of teaching? We are not saying that these practices have to go, but the design of the experience needs to be fundamentally shifted. So take a moment to think about who feels satisfied when everyone's working on that math problem. Why does it feel unsatisfying? Who's feeling empowered? Is it meeting our target? Go ahead and push pause if you need to really think about this for a moment as we start to think about our goals. All right, so then moving on to page 18 and 19, in the section of know your primary goal, right? Know your goal. What we really need to think about is clarifying the goal or purpose of the learning experience. Is the goal that a student can write a story, or is it that they can identify the beginning, middle, and end of a story? Is the goal that the student understands the cause and effect of something, or that they can write on the piece of paper neatly that they understood the cause and therefore the effect of something? This is really the idea that we are clarifying and maybe detangling the many things we're asking students to do when we give them an assignment. And we have to acknowledge that it takes time to stop and think about what we assign, the way we asked a student to do an assignment, um, and what is that primary goal that we really want them to come away with, that we know every student in our classroom can and must be able to do. I love these graphics. These are from Katie Novak. So one way to think about this is unpacking the types of standards. So for example, content standards define the knowledge, the concept that students should acquire. So words like communicate scientific ideas about the way stars over their life cycle produce elements, or compare and contrast casual cultural uses of artwork, okay? Versus method standards, that outline specific skills students will have to complete. So accurately measure an angle or write an informative text. Okay, so one of these are about communicating. So if it is to communicate a scientific idea, then they can have a lot of different ways to do that, because communication can be in writing, it could be a podcast, it could be a poster, right? It could be a video. So are we going to vary the methods or the ways in which they get to that firm goal? Everybody is going to communicate this idea, the scientific idea. Or is it a standard that is to write text, right? So that means they aren't doing a podcast or creating a poster or using a video. They're going to need to figure out how to compose a piece of writing. Okay. So, and then is it the actual handwriting piece of it, or is it speech to text? There's some other pieces. Then we can vary the way that we get to that goal. So flexible means, but very specific goals. So one of those things is really knowing what is our standard and what is our goal for our students. Then once we know that goal, we have to start thinking in our head, what are the roadblocks, right? So in the book, she's going to use that idea of the road trip, right? What are the things that might get in the way of us getting there? What are those barriers that our environment might provide for students that are trying to do this learning? So what we need to do is break down the goal into subcomponents, right? Create guides and supports for students, what they need along the way that will help them get around those roadblocks or get around those barriers. Then you need to think about creating appropriate options, right? That the students can get to a point where they self-select, right? So they start to internalize that as expert learners and they think about, what's going to work best for me in order to get to our end goal. Our next section is goals and the UDL guidelines, a powerful design combination. So this idea that on a road trip, right, if you're trying to get from point A to point B, some people might need to get there a different way. Some people are going to take a flight, right? Someone else might be afraid of flying, right? And so they're going to then have to figure out how would they drive there or take the train there or walk or hike, or maybe their goal is to ride their bike across, right? So you can think about different ways someone might get there. So now we need to think about that within our classroom. Each learner will come with different skills, right? But they're not all going to be the same. Everyone comes with something. They're going to get to that end goal. So what are we going to do if they're not coming with the same skill levels, with the same skills in general? Well, we need to start different. We need to acknowledge that we might actually sometimes have different starting places. So this is where they talk about the ice skater, and we're going like, oh, well, actually, instead of just starting everybody at the same starting line, making sure they do all the same steps and all the same checkpoints and all the rest stops the same all the way along the line. Instead, we're going to make sure they know where the end goal is, and they may start somewhere different, based on what they need in order to get there. This is really this idea of clear goals, make it possible to align things like our rubrics and our assessments, right? So that we can make sure that we are measuring the intended goal. How often, back to that question in the beginning, do we end up measuring something that isn't actually our goal? Do we end up grading on the way the presentation looks versus the content, or vice versa, depending on what kind of standard it is? So, as you think about this quick overview of this chapter and you're thinking about the continuing learning cycle, remember that we started with up in the understanding variability. Then our second piece was knowing our goals, right? Transforming tried and true techniques is that next part. So it's through intentional goal setting, not accidental. It's that ahead of time intentional goal setting that lead us to purposeful, intentional uses of flexible options. This isn't giving kids as many choices as possible and just pick anything you want to do. When we give choices, they are specific and they're related to that goal, right? The whole point is to reduce barriers to help them get to that end point, right? That's not about having so many options. Too many options are overwhelming for many people. It's about having the right options that are self-selected, and we can really use the UDL guidelines to help us think about what those look like. Also, one of those points is to really think about how can we work with students to find that, right? Let's not make the decision for them. Let's work with them to talk about what should that look like, our end goals look like, and what are we going to come across? Why would it be hard to get there? What do we need to do? What kind of supports do we need within our classroom and our learning environments? And when we're able to do that, when we combined those UDL principles with those firm goals, but flexible means, we're going to see more success. All right, let's move on to chapter 3 and dig into identifying potential barriers that are within our systems that are preventing students from getting to those goals. And then thinking about how we design or redesign, in many of our cases, or detangle lessons to align with the techniques and to align our techniques, our tools, our strategies with the beliefs that we feel about students, that belief that we know that all students can meet the same goals. So let's jump into it. So the first section is called Breaking Those Habits. It's page 25 through 26. And I think it's important to think about this as we're doing it, is that educational habits and routines are important, right? They allow us, when we do things, they save us time. It allows us to take the cognitive load off. Like, we know that we come into our room, we know where we put our supplies, we know we do those things almost automatically. We can do them in our sleep, often is said, right? Those things that no longer take us a lot of brain power. The first time we learned those routines, it took time. We had to talk, we had to practice, we had to learn it. Once they become a habit, it happens quickly and it saves us time. So we have more time to allow for other cognitively challenging pieces. So we can spend time attaining new information and moving in our learning goals. So a lot of this comes from this idea of the habit loop and the process. So not all habits are bad. They're actually important within our systems, but we just have to be purposeful and really thoughtful about them. So on page 26 to 27, there's really this look at habits in our classroom, and taking a moment just to pause and think about our habits and what kind of generalizations our students get based on the habits, right? If we always are placing students in a certain group, if we always have the best readers reading to our struggling readers, what are we telling students, right? They're smart individuals. They generalize and are extrapolating information from our habits, the way we do things. And how does that make them feel about themselves as learners? Are we giving the right message? How can we change those messages? How do we support those good messages that we're sending? So as we start to look at UDL, we think about using the framework purposely at the beginning as we're setting our habits and we're setting our goals, this idea that we're going to have rigorous goals. We're going to push students, right? But we're going to provide flexible options, or another terminology that you often hear is flexible means, for them to get there. Everyone in this classroom will get there. Some days, some of us are going to need to take a different route than someone else. The next day, someone might need that route that they didn't need the day before. It's this idea that we have flexible options that allow us to get to those same goals. And this really happens when we try something new. Really important. Our attitudes and our habits vary based on our context. When we walk into our home, when we walk into a classroom or a different classroom, right, our habits might change. Where do we put our jacket? Where do we put our bag? How loud are we? What kind of, how, our voice? Do we collaborate? Are we on our own? Even just our attitude. Do we come in there ready and excited, right? The context, meaning the type of learning you're expecting to do, your relationship with that, with the people within that room, within that space, the subject, how comfortable, what the generalizations you have about yourself as a learner, what you believe you can and can't do, right? All of that varies based on the day and where you're at. So that's another reason for this flexible goals. We may have someone who is an excellent reader, and their scores say that they understand and they're super high in this area, but when they go to a certain subject, when they're reading out of the textbook and a math book, they may have a different understanding, right? Or when they read poetry versus reading history, that there's something different in that. And that's okay, and it's to be expected. We all vary based on those contexts. So thinking about this, about how small changes can have a profound impact. I love that quote out of the book, right? This making it so it's not about big things when we're first starting and trying something. We try something new, we pick something small that could allow for a profound impact, a change in belief about someone, about themselves, right? Trying something that allows a student to get to that goal and feel successful. Page 27 through 31 really starts thinking about being critical about our tried and true techniques. So let's take a moment, and you might want to just stop and pause a little bit on these pages, because there's a lot in these pages, where the author is asking us to think about our favorite things, the ones like, this always works, this makes me feel good, this is, my students are always successful. Let's think about those, what we have in our toolbox, all of the different strategies and things that we use. And do we have the right ones? Do we have what we need in order to remove the barriers for the students? Or are we just using the tools that we like? Also, as we look at this, the author really uses the research from visible learning from teachers and has this great background, as the authors explain, and they use the one of the idea of homework. The only thing that we can find with providing homework is that there is a bump in students doing well on a short-term quiz, but it doesn't really talk about the long-term. And a lot of the kids that were already doing well in the class do the best on their homework and tend to continue. So we don't see a change in what those pieces are. So the question is then, what are the barriers that we know we're going to need to plan for within our environments? Then do we have the right tools, and are we making the right types of supports for students? And what impact does that have on whom? So really stopping and looking at our tried and true practices and thinking about who's getting helped, who's getting what they need, and who's having that piece. As we really start talking in this chapter about it, engagement on the UDL framework and shifting to engagement, making sure students feel like they belong, but not just the belonging piece of it, moving on to, does this relate to them in some way? How is this going to attain to their life? They can see that there's a reason for it. Then the learning becomes about the learning and not just the routine or the habit of learning. I'm not just doing this because I was told I have to. I'm doing this because I was told I have to, and I understand why, and here's the pieces with it. The quote here, what our goal really is and how our designing is supporting the intended outcome and variability of our learners. Really thinking about that goal, right? And who's it helping, and what have we missed? I love too this idea that as you're going through the learning with the students themselves, gathering feedback. Hey guys, did that work? Did we get where we need to do? Don't wait to think about this when you've done the final assessment. But all along the way, are we getting feedback and then pivoting? What do we need to do differently tomorrow? Who do I need to make sure that, what barriers do I need to remove so that I know those students are going to feel successful the next day? All right, so then as we move on to page 31 and 32, we start looking at ideas of trading up our new ways. of using these things, of practicing with UDL. So we're starting to think about, okay, I noticed that there are some barriers still. We noticed not all of our students are meeting standard. We noticed that there's students that are struggling. I'm working really hard, but what things can I change? Okay, and we referenced this a little earlier in chapter 2. This idea of the ice skating comes up, right? We often start students at the same point. We say, okay, what's your prior knowledge? We ask them like a KWL chart. We ask them like, what do you already know? What do you want to know? But we still make them all start, even if they say they know different things. We often start a class or an environment with everyone at the same place. It's okay to start somewhere, obviously, right? But we need to then maybe start thinking about, and in this case, it was like, okay, well, I'm telling them what that end goal is. Here's our goal. Here's where I need you to get. Every learner is going to get here. What can we do along the way? So thinking about, what do we need to get there? Ask people in the classroom, all right, in order to do that, what do we need to do? Sometimes we're going to put people in similar groups, right? Maybe it's going to be assistive technology, digital print, large print. Maybe it's going to be graphic organizers, right? What can we plan for, knowing that we're going to have varied learners in our group? The table on page 33 is really powerful, and I would really recommend pausing if you haven't already and really going over this chart with yourself, and if you're daring enough, do it with a partner. Really looking at, do our beliefs in learners actually align with our practices? When we ask those questions of them, are we giving the things that we need in order for students to be able to be successful with it? So if you'd like, go ahead and pause for a second and look closely at that table on page 33. So here's that part where if we're going to look at table 3.1, take a couple minutes, reflect on your practice. What can we do about it using UDL? After you've done that, think about, what are the small steps that you might take? It's okay if it's just your first step. Making sure that we know that the variability and context of our students within our learning environments, know that our learning environment itself can be the barrier, and start creating new habits. So when you start planning, it takes a while when you start detangling these and looking at what your goals are. But as you start to do it more, it becomes a habit for you as an educator. And all of a sudden, those things that you're planning for and those barriers that you know you're going to remove. Oh, I need to think about large vision. I need to think about having images. I need to think about the things that I can use to support as we're going through this. All right. 33 through 35, page 33 through 35, which is the trading up for new ways, as well as continuing, which is clarifying the goal. Love table 3.2. Okay. And I will say that one of my favorite UDL strategies from Novak is detangling, which is in chapter 6. We'll get to that later on. If you're ready now, you can look at it, but it's a way for you to look at a lesson or a unit and really pull it apart so that you know you can clarify that goal. Take a moment to look at that. Once again, we're aligning those beliefs, what we just finished talking about, with our practices, and then going, okay, so what I'm going to do to clarify my goal. Most of us will find that our goals were a little tangled, that they are asking students to do several things, and not always, but often there's these other things that we're asking them to do that aren't necessarily that piece. So how do we really clarify that goal, know that we know what it is, and how do we do better next time? As you go through that, that gets us onto our last page, which is continuing your unlearning cycle, just knowing where we are. We have talked about variability. Oops. We have looked at the importance of knowing your goal. Now we've started talking about how do we actually detangle it, right? How do we change that? The big part too is our goal deliberate? How are we being reflective about it? And the truth of the matter, it's going to take a lot of effort. The more often we do it, the less effort it will take. As you move through this cycle, please make sure that you're thinking about variability and you're remembering context. Variability changes where students are is different depending on their context, and it changes for them often, for all of us often. Knowing that this is our first step, right, as we start to set goals. So focus on one of these things right now: variability in context or goal setting and next steps. We look forward to seeing you. Soon. You can reflect. We'll be sharing on our Padlet. You can find this link and the Padlet link on our website. Look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you so much.